Understand this before anything else. There is a moment that comes to every soul who has ever dared to imagine a different life. A moment so quiet and so unremarkable that most people never even notice it is happening. It is the moment right before the miracle. It looks nothing like victory. It looks like exhaustion. It looks like doubt. It looks like the temptation to fold your hands and whisper, maybe this was never meant for me. And yet, that very moment, the one that feels the most like defeat, is the one the ancient teachers of consciousness called the threshold. It is the last narrow gate before the wide open field of your fulfilled desire. Think about this for a moment. Every story of transformation you have ever admired, every testimony that once moved you to tears shares one hidden ingredient that is rarely spoken about directly. It is not talent, it is not luck, it is not even faith in the way most people define faith. It is persistence of state. It is the refusal to abandon an inner conviction simply because the outer world has not yet rearranged itself to agree with you. Let that sink into your spirit. The world you see is not the world that is. It is the world that was, crystallized from a consciousness that existed before this present instant. What you are living through right now, this circumstance, this delay, this apparent silence from the universe is nothing more than yesterday's assumption finally catching up with today's clock. It is old thought solidified into form, parading in front of you as if it were permanent truth. But nothing outside of you is permanent, nothing. The chair you are sitting in feels solid, yet science itself confirms it is mostly empty space, vibrating at a frequency your senses interpret as solidity. Your circumstances are no different. They are vibration, they are frequency, they are the frozen echo of a state of consciousness you once occupied, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And if a state of consciousness created what you see now, then a new state of consciousness held with unwavering persistence can create what you have not yet seen. You must realize that persistence is not a personality trait reserved for the naturally strong. It is a spiritual discipline available to anyone willing to practice it. It is the sacred art of remaining faithful to an unseen reality while the seen reality insists otherwise. This is the deepest meaning behind the words attributed to the prophets and the mystics throughout the ages, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. Notice the phrasing carefully, not the evidence of things already visible, not the celebration of things already proven, but evidence of things not yet seen. This means faith by its very definition operates in darkness, in silence, in the space where nothing outward confirms your inner knowing. And it is precisely there, in that uncomfortable, undecorated middle space, that most people quit. Consider this. Somewhere right now, someone is 1 week away from the answer to a prayer they whispered 11 months ago, and they are packing up their belief, folding it away like an old garment, convinced it no longer fits. Somewhere right now, someone is 3 conversations away from the opportunity they have imagined vividly, night after night, and they are telling themselves it was foolish to dream so specifically. Somewhere right now, someone is standing at the exact edge of breakthrough, close enough that if they could see behind the veil, they would fall to their knees in gratitude, and instead they are reaching for the comfort of giving up, because giving up feels safer than continuing to hope in what appears to be silence. This is why persistence is not simply a virtue. It is a spiritual technology. It is the mechanism by which imagination hardens into fact. Understand this deeply. Imagination is not decoration for the mind. It is not merely a pleasant escape from reality. Imagination is the creative power of God operating through you. And every time you assume a state, every time you inhabit a feeling as though your desire is already fulfilled, you are participating in the same creative act that spoke light into darkness and order into chaos. But here is the truth that changes everything. A single assumption held for a single afternoon rarely produces lasting transformation. It is not enough to visit the feeling of your wish fulfilled the way a tourist visits a foreign city, admiring it briefly before returning home to old familiar thought patterns. You must move into that feeling. You must live there. You must return to it again and again, especially on the days when returning feels most difficult, because those are precisely the days when your persistence is doing its deepest work. Feel this deeply. Every act of persistence you offer to your unseen desire is a form of worship. It is an act of devotion more sincere than any spoken prayer, because it says, without words, I trust what I cannot yet see more than I trust what is currently in front of me. This is the posture of every soul who has ever moved mountains, not through effort in the physical sense, but through unwavering allegiance to an inner state. The mountain does not move because you scream at it. The mountain moves because you stop believing in the mountain and start believing with your whole being in the flattened road beyond it. Allow yourself to see this clearly. There is a difference between wanting something and assuming something. Wanting keeps the desire outside of you, forever at arm's length, forever separate from your identity. Wanting says, I hope this happens to me one day. Assuming says something entirely different. Assuming says, this already belongs to me in the unseen, and I am simply waiting for the visible world to reflect what is already true in the invisible. This shift from wanting to assuming is the beginning of true manifestation. But the shift alone is not enough. The shift must be protected, guarded, defended daily against the assaults of doubt, discouragement, and the deceptive evidence of delay. This defense of your inner state, this refusal to surrender your assumption, no matter how long the outer world takes to catch up, is what persistence truly means. Think about this for a moment. If manifestation were instant, if every assumption produced immediate visible results, the entire spiritual journey would collapse into something shallow and untested. There would be no refinement of character. There would be no deepening of trust. There would be no transformation of the self into the kind of being who can hold a vision steady, even when reality has not yet blinked in agreement. The gap between assumption and manifestation, the space that so many find unbearable, is not a punishment. It is a proving ground. It is the sacred furnace in which your faith is tested, tempered, and made strong enough to carry the very thing you asked for. You're not being ignored by the universe during this waiting period. You're not being punished, forgotten, or overlooked. Understand this truth and let it dissolve the fear that so often creeps in during delay. The law that governs consciousness is utterly impartial, utterly faithful, utterly incapable of forgetting an impression that has been genuinely and repeatedly felt as real. What feels like silence is not the universe withholding your desire. It is the universe assembling the exact people, circumstances, timing, and conditions necessary for your desire to arrive in its most complete and stable form. A house built too quickly on an unprepared foundation will eventually crumble, but a house built patiently with every beam properly set will stand through every storm that follows. Your dream is being built the same way, beam by beam, in a dimension your physical eyes cannot yet perceive. Let this settle within you. The scriptures speak often of waiting, not as a punishment, but as a posture of strength. Those who wait shall renew their strength, not those who force, not those who manipulate, not those who beg or bargain or panic. Those who wait in the spiritual sense, meaning those who remain faithfully assumed in their desired state while circumstances have not yet shifted, are the ones who renew their strength, who rise as if lifted on invisible wings, who run without growing weary, who walk without fainting. This waiting is not passive. It is intensely active on the level of consciousness. It is the daily, sometimes hourly, return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It is choosing again and again to think from the end rather than about the end. There is an enormous difference between these two postures. Thinking about your desire keeps you outside of it, analyzing it, hoping for it, sometimes even worrying about it. Thinking from your desire places you inside of it, already living from its fulfillment, already speaking, feeling, and moving as the version of you who has already received what was asked for. Notice what happens when you shift your inner speech from, I hope this works out, to this already belongs to me. The entire emotional chemistry of your body changes. Where there was once anxious tension, there is now settled peace. Where there was once desperate grasping, there is now quiet confidence. This shift is not simply psychological comfort. It is the literal reprogramming of the subconscious mind, which does not distinguish between an event that is physically happening and an event that is vividly and emotionally imagined with conviction. The subconscious accepts as true whatever is impressed upon it with feeling, regardless of whether that feeling originates from an external event or an internally generated assumption. This is precisely why the discipline of persistence is so essential. A single vivid imagining, repeated with feeling over days, weeks, and sometimes months, eventually overrides the old subconscious pattern that had been quietly generating your previous circumstances. Consider this: the subconscious mind does not operate on the calendar of human patience. It operates on the calendar of repetition and emotional intensity. This means the exact same principle that once, without your conscious awareness, built the life you are now trying to leave behind, can be redirected deliberately and consciously to build the life you actually desire. You did not fail because manifestation does not work. You experienced results you did not consciously choose because you were unconsciously assuming, feeling, and believing patterns handed to you by your upbringing, your environment, your fears, and your unexamined self-concept. The moment you become aware of this mechanism, the entire game changes. You are no longer a passenger in your own mind. You become the deliberate operator of your own inner world, and from that inner world, your outer world must eventually faithfully rearrange itself to match. Imagine for a moment the story of a man who plants a seed deep in the earth and then only 3 days later digs it back up to check on its progress, disappointed to find no visible growth. Frustrated, he plants it again only to dig it up once more a few days after that. Every time he disturbs the soil, he interrupts the very process he is trying to encourage. The seed had everything it needed. It had the right soil, the right conditions, the right potential encoded within it. What it did not have was uninterrupted time beneath the surface, hidden from view, doing its quiet work in darkness before ever breaking through into visible life. This is precisely what happens when persistence collapses into doubt. Every time you abandon your assumed state to check whether reality has changed yet, you disturb the very soil in which your desire was growing. You do not need to keep digging up the seed. You need to trust the soil, trust the process, and continue watering it daily with feeling, gratitude, and unwavering inner conviction. The truth is, most people do not fail at manifestation because the principle is false. They fail because they give up exactly 1 day, 1 week, or sometimes even one single moment before the visible breakthrough was due to appear. This is one of the most sorrowful patterns observed across countless testimonies of transformation. The turning back happens so close to the turning point that looking back, it becomes almost unbearable to realize how near the answer truly was. This is why persistence is spoken of so often in sacred texts as the defining quality of those who inherit the promise. Not the most talented, not the most deserving by human standards, not even the most faithful in the beginning, but those who endured, who continued, who refused to release their grip on the inner conviction even when every outer sign suggested release would be reasonable. You must realize that the outer world is always, without exception, the last thing to change. It is not the first sign of your success. It is the final proof of a transformation that has already been completed on the inside. This is why chasing external validation before your internal state has stabilized is like checking a cake through the oven door every 30 seconds, opening it repeatedly, letting the heat escape, wondering why it never seems to rise. The baking happens in darkness behind a closed door in conditions you cannot fully observe. Your manifestation is baking in exactly the same way, behind the door of the unseen, in a spiritual oven whose temperature is regulated by your consistency of feeling, not by your ability to peak. Let that sink into your spirit. There is enormous freedom in this understanding. Once you accept that your only true responsibility is to maintain the inner state, to remain faithfully assumed in the feeling of your wish already fulfilled, an immense pressure lifts from your shoulders. You are no longer required to manipulate people, force circumstances, or manufacture outcomes through sheer willpower. You are simply required to be faithful to a feeling. This does not mean you become passive in the physical world. It means your physical actions flow naturally and inspired from your inner conviction rather than desperate action taken from a place of lack or fear. Action taken from fear says, I must force this to happen because I do not trust it will happen otherwise. Action taken from faith says, I move forward calmly because I already know on the level of consciousness that this is already mine. The truth is, this shift from fear-based action to faith-based action transforms not only your results, but your entire quality of life during the waiting period. Two people can be pursuing the exact same external goal, one from anxiety and one from calm assumption, and their inner experience of the journey will be entirely different. One will suffer through every delay, interpreting each setback as evidence of failure. The other will move through the exact same delays with peace, interpreting each apparent setback as simply part of the process, trusting the timing even when the timing does not match personal preference. This is what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. Sight is limited to the present moment and the immediate past. Faith reaches into the unseen future and pulls it gently, patiently, persistently into present experience. Understand this. Divine timing is not a mystical excuse for delay. It is a precise and intelligent unfolding of causes and effects that your finite human perspective cannot fully calculate. From your limited vantage point, a delay can look like denial. But from a higher vantage point, the very delay you are resenting may be protecting you from receiving your desire in a form that would have brought harm, or it may be assembling elements you could not have arranged yourself, or it may simply be allowing your own capacity, character, and consciousness to expand enough to comfortably hold what you are asking for. Think about this for a moment. If you were suddenly given this very instant the exact external manifestation of your desire without any internal transformation having taken place, would you actually be equipped to sustain it? Often the growth that occurs during the waiting period is not a delay of the gift. It is the preparation of the vessel meant to receive and keep the gift. This is why persistence must be paired with patience, though the two are not identical. Persistence is the unwavering return to your assumed state. Patience is the peaceful trust that allows the assumed state to mature without anxious interference. Together, they form the disciplined rhythm of true manifestation. Persist in feeling, be patient in timing, persist in imagination, be patient in appearance, persist in identity, be patient in evidence. This rhythm, practiced daily, becomes the quiet heartbeat of a life being consciously created rather than passively endured. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are not a helpless observer of an indifferent universe. You are, whether you have recognized it before this moment or not, the very consciousness through which your entire experience is being generated. This is not arrogance. This is not delusion. This is the deepest spiritual truth echoed throughout the wisdom traditions of humanity, that the kingdom of God is within you, not distant, not external, not something to be earned through years of struggle, but present right now in the very center of your own awareness, waiting only to be recognized, claimed, and lived from. The kingdom within is not a place you travel to after death. It is the creative authority you carry every single day, in every single thought, in every single feeling you allow yourself to dwell upon. When you begin to grasp this, the entire concept of manifestation stops feeling like a technique you perform and starts feeling like a remembering of who you have always been. Notice what happens when you stop asking the universe to change your circumstances and instead ask yourself who you must become in consciousness to already belong to the circumstances you desire. This is the true meaning of identity preceding manifestation. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are. And what you are is not fixed. It is not a permanent, unchangeable fact handed to you at birth. It is a fluid, moldable state of consciousness that you have the power right now in this very moment to consciously redefine. The version of you who has already achieved your desire exists not in some distant, unreachable future, but in the eternal now of imagination, available to be entered into at will. Every time you close your eyes and feel yourself as that fulfilled version, you are not fantasizing. You are visiting a real state that exists in the infinite dimensions of consciousness. And the more often you visit, the more that state becomes your natural home, until one day, almost without noticing the exact moment of transition, you realize you are no longer visiting it. You are living there. This is why persistence until the end carries such profound spiritual weight. The end is not a finish line measured in days or months. The end is the moment your inner conviction becomes so stabilized, so unshakable, so thoroughly your default state that the outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match. Consciousness is the only reality, and the outer world is nothing more than a faithful mirror, incapable of showing you anything other than what you persistently are on the inside. If you find yourself frustrated by a mirror's reflection, the solution was never to argue with the mirror. The solution is to change what stands in front of it. Consider this: every great transformation recorded throughout history, whether spiritual, personal, or societal, followed the same hidden pattern. A period of vision, a period of resistance, a period of apparent failure, and then, often without warning, a breakthrough that appeared sudden to outside observers, but was, in truth, the natural culmination of persistent inner alignment finally reaching critical mass. The observer who only sees the breakthrough moment mistakenly believes success arrived overnight. But you now understand the hidden architecture beneath every overnight success. It was never overnight. It was assumption held faithfully day after day, feeling after feeling, until the invisible finally became visible. Let this settle within you as we move deeper. There will be days during this process when doubt arrives uninvited, disguised as reasonable thinking. It will whisper that perhaps you have been foolish, that perhaps this principle does not apply to your particular situation, that perhaps other people manifest their desires, but you somehow are the exception. Understand this: doubt is not evidence against your desire. Doubt is simply an old familiar pattern trying to reassert its former authority over your consciousness. It has ruled your inner world for a long time, and it does not relinquish that rule without resistance. This resistance is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign you are doing something powerful enough to threaten the old pattern's survival. The very discomfort you feel while persisting through doubt is often the exact evidence that transformation is underway. You must realize that the discomfort of persistence is radically different from the discomfort of misalignment. Misalignment feels like forcing something that does not belong to you, chasing an external validation that leaves you feeling empty even when achieved. Persistence, by contrast, feels like tension stretched across a threshold, uncomfortable, yes, but purposeful, aimed, alive with quiet anticipation. Learn to recognize this distinction within your own body. Misalignment drains you. Persistence, even in its most challenging moments, ultimately strengthens you because it is aligned with your deepest truth, even when it has not yet aligned with your current circumstances. Feel this deeply. Every single soul who has ever manifested something remarkable walked through a season that looked from the outside indistinguishable from failure. The people who eventually became known for extraordinary breakthroughs were, at some earlier point, completely unknown, completely unproven, completely surrounded by evidence that contradicted their inner conviction. What separated them from everyone else who quietly gave up during that same season was not talent, not privilege, not even greater faith at the very beginning. It was simply this: they continued to assume the end after everyone else, including sometimes their own doubting thoughts, insisted the end was impossible. They persisted until the end, and only then did the visible proof arrive to justify what they had already known, quietly and privately, long before anyone else could see it. This is why regret so rarely comes from failure itself. Regret comes from abandonment. It comes from that haunting, unanswerable question that follows a person for years afterward. What would have happened if I had simply continued one more week, one more month, one more season? Understand this truth and let it become a permanent companion on your journey from this moment forward. The pain of persisting through uncertainty is temporary. It rises and falls, some days sharper, some days softer, but it always eventually gives way to the peace of arrival. The pain of abandoning your desire prematurely, however, has no such natural resolution. It lingers, it resurfaces unexpectedly, often years later, disguised as a quiet ache whenever you encounter a reminder of the path not taken. This is why persistence, uncomfortable as it may be in the immediate moment, is ultimately the path of far less suffering than premature surrender. Allow yourself to see this clearly. You are being invited right now in this very reading to make a decision that has nothing to do with your external circumstances and everything to do with your internal allegiance. Will you remain faithful to the feeling of your fulfilled desire even when the visible world has not yet confirmed it? Will you continue speaking, thinking, and feeling from the end, even on days when doing so feels almost absurd against the backdrop of unchanged circumstances? Will you trust the unseen architecture of divine timing, even when your human impatience begs for immediate proof? This decision, made quietly within your own consciousness, is the single most powerful act available to you. It is more powerful than any external strategy, more powerful than any amount of forced effort, more powerful than any attempt to manipulate people or circumstances into compliance. The truth is, the entire universe is fundamentally cooperative with a consciousness that refuses to waver. This is not sentimentality. This is the observable pattern behind every recorded transformation across every tradition that has ever explored the relationship between inner state and outer experience. A wavering consciousness produces wavering results, sometimes manifesting the desire, sometimes manifesting its opposite, depending on which state was held most dominantly at any given moment. A steady, persistent consciousness, however, produces steady, inevitable results because it has removed the contradiction that so often sabotages manifestation before it can complete its natural cycle. Think about this for a moment. Contradiction is the true enemy of manifestation, far more than doubt itself. Doubt, when acknowledged and gently released, does not destroy your progress. But contradiction, meaning holding two opposing states with equal intensity, one moment assuming fulfillment and the next moment assuming lack, creates a kind of internal cancellation that keeps your outer world locked in an unchanging holding pattern. This is why persistence must include the discipline of catching yourself the moment you drift into contradiction and gently, without self-judgment, returning again to the assumed state of your fulfilled desire. This return is not a sign of weakness. It is the very practice that builds spiritual strength, the same way lifting a weight repeatedly builds physical strength. Each return to the assumed state, even after a moment of doubt, is a repetition that deepens your capacity to hold that state longer, more naturally, and with less effort over time. You are not required to be perfect in this practice. Understand this truth clearly, because perfectionism itself often becomes another disguised form of self-sabotage, another reason to abandon the process out of frustration with your own perceived inconsistency. The goal was never flawless, uninterrupted assumption from the very first day. The goal is faithful returning. Every master of this principle throughout every generation experienced days of doubt, moments of forgetting, seasons of frustration. What distinguished them was not the absence of these human experiences, but their refusal to let those experiences become the final chapter of the story. They returned. Again and again they returned to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, until returning became less effortful, until the assumed state became less like something they had to consciously construct and more like something they naturally, effortlessly were. Let that sink into your spirit as we move toward the deepest layer of this teaching. Persistence until the end is not merely a strategy for acquiring what you want. It is at its core a spiritual maturation process that transforms you into the kind of consciousness capable of sustained creation. The desire you are currently pursuing, whether it concerns provision, relationship, health, purpose, or any other dimension of your life,